I invite you, if you have a Bible, to at least get your brains in that vibe for a little bit here as we take some time to think about the Scriptures. We're focused today specifically on the account of Jesus' resurrection found in John 20. So if you want to turn to John 20, this is what Ruth read for us just a little bit ago, so I won't reread the whole text. But the book of John is unique. Patty and I were talking about this morning at the Easter sunrise service because she also kind of worked from this text. It's unique in how it unfolds what's happening here in the resurrection because it doesn't take the same path as the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, because they're accomplishing and doing different things. The ancient people in this context weren't as overly critical about the historical process, especially John. He's not writing to primarily give a historic testimony to the resurrection of Jesus. That does happen specifically in Luke and in Matthew, but John has something else in play. There's something else he's trying to do. He's going to be historical, but he's not going to do it in such a way that a historian would say, this is exactly how the events were laid out. He puts in the events in certain orders and in certain ways to make a point for us. This is one of the reasons I love the book of John. And as you know, if you've read the book of John, or if you were hanging with us a number of weeks ago as we walked through the 7 signs of the book of John, you know that whenever we open the book of John, we're dealing in the realm of symbols. Because the whole book is structured on 7 symbolic actions of Jesus that point in kind of an ascending order toward the glory of the ultimate sign that is to come, which is the sign of the cross. And so all of these signs kind of point with an upward trajectory to the glory that will take place at the ultimate suffering of the King of the world on the cross. So these signs, water turned to wine, the healing of the nobleman's son, the healing of the paralyzed man at Bethsaida, the feeding of the 5,000, which we talked about was actually more like 20 because they only counted men back then. So men, women, children, there was probably closer to 20,000 people that were miraculously fed with 5 loaves and 2 fishes. And these aren't just random aha kind of miracles. Look what I can do. I can take 5 loaves and 2 fishes and feed everybody. That's not the point. Jesus, in a symbolic way, is showing what his kingdom is going to be like. That there will be provision for all, that all are welcome at this kingdom. The signs go on. Jesus walks on water to show his supremacy over creation itself, the healing of the man who was born blind, and then finally the 7th sign, the raising of Lazarus from the dead, which, as you know, is a signal. John, the writer, is pointing us toward an even greater resurrection to come. So all these symbols are really important. But we live in a world of symbols as well. It's not just the ancient people who are dealing in symbols. In fact, I could tell you some symbols and you would know what they represent. I wouldn't even have to draw them for you. I could just tell them to you and you could see them in your mind and you'd know exactly what I'm talking about. Think of an L with a circle around it on a car. My car. No. I wish. No, what is it? Alexis. That's all I have to do. I didn't even have to draw. You didn't have to see it. You saw it in your mind. I could do this in all kinds of ways. If I were to just show you a symbol, like a little kind of half circle connected with a little dent in it that comes down, a heart. What is that? That's not what your heart looks like. It's a symbol representing heart, love, and there's like a history to that symbol that I won't go into. I won't bore you with that. But it's interesting. If I were to show you this ring on my finger, what would that symbolize? Marriage. What else? commitment, enduring love, a promise. All that is contained in this little symbol on my finger. But if I were to show you a fantasy book with a ring on it on the front cover, what would that symbol represent for all you nerds out there? Right? The ring of power. Precious. Right? That's totally different than what's going on here. We hope. The point is, symbols can change. If you were to take those rings and you were to interconnect them in 4 ways and stick them on a car, what would you have? Yeah. And if you were to stick those rings in a little different order and put 5 of them and hang them up and put fireworks under them, what would happen? The Olympics. You see what? We live in a world of symbolism and imagery. And we could keep going. One of my favorite symbols. People don't even know what it is. A little rounded check mark on a shoe. Nike. But it's not a check mark. It's the wings of a god, a Greek god of victory. I don't know why they just put one wing. I mean, who wants a one-winged, No, that's not the point. It's a symbol, right? You don't have to have 2 wings to make the point. You just have to have one, and you see it, and you're supposed to think, victory. So this is how John works, and it's not far removed from how our minds work as well, because we live in a world of images and symbols as well. And so John, in his unpacking of this historical moment of the resurrection of Jesus, he's going to fill it in with all these symbols and images. And if you're not paying attention, and especially if you're not thinking in light of the Hebrew Scriptures, you're going to miss a lot of imagery that's going on. It's exploding with imagery. So I just want to point out to a few of them to you so you don't miss them all. I don't have time to go into all of them, but let me at least give you some of the most obvious ones. A few images that are worth noting is how John talks about the actual tomb. Because back in this day, a person who was of some high stature or royalty would have a certain level of tomb, and the way John describes this tomb, he's trying to indicate to us that this tomb is set aside for royalty. This is why it's a tomb that's never been used before. This is why it's the tomb of a wealthy man. So it's a large tomb with caverns and caves. So his body would have been laid at the spice area so that once they were done doing all the spices, then they could put it back into the other conclave so that it could be used at another time. It was common in this day to have a big stone in front of these tombs so that you could roll them out of the way so that you could get access and do the spices for burial. That John even notes how many spices in the previous chapter were brought to the tomb. It's a lot. It's enough spices fit for royalty. And John is doing this very intentionally because this tomb is a symbol, and the spices are a symbol of the royalty of who Jesus is. Obvious, a big one is that John makes very careful attention to point out that it's a garden environment. That's not just because gardens are cool or pretty. It's because the garden, if you know the rest of the Bible, is a very specific space where something incredible happened. It's where the first men and women were created and where God walked with his people in the garden, in this perfect paradise kind of environment. And now, all of a sudden, again, the imagery returns. We're in the garden again. There's more. The very person who John spends the most time pointing out her interaction with Jesus and with this garden tomb is Mary. And Mary Magdalene, even her name is a symbol. And John makes special care to do something really interesting in the original language. This is hard for us because we don't all read this language, but what he actually does for us is when Jesus says her name, he changes her name to the Hebrew form of it, which is Miriam. And why does he do that? Because he wants all of us who've read the bigger scripture, he wants to point us back to Miriam, who was connected to somebody named Moses. And Moses himself, as a symbol, was put in a little grave-like box and sent down a river and then brought out in resurrection victory. And Miriam becomes a kind of caretaker of Moses and becomes a kind of right-hand person to Moses. And so John is playing with all this imagery. You're supposed to just see all these like stories explode in your head in this moment. The one I love the most, though, is Jesus mistaken as the gardener. That's not just a little side note. John is playing with us here. He is smiling as he writes this because Mary turns and says, she thinks this is the gardener. And she's wrong, but she's right, isn't she? Because Jesus is the gardener. Jesus is the one who brings in renewal and restores and cultivates his people in this world. He is the one who has all authority to set the chaos of this world right and bring back in the garden order that God originally intended for all humanity. So there's more here, but all these images are swirling around us in this unpacking of the story of Jesus. And all this gets to the question that the angels asked Mary and Jesus asked Mary. Did you notice that they both asked the same question? That's important. The angels posed the same question to Mary when she goes into the tomb and she's already been there once. She freaked out, so she ran back to the city to tell the disciples, they've taken the body of our Lord. So they start running. There's more running happening in this chapter than in all the other Gospels combined. It's true. John has everybody running. They're running here, they're running there. It's like, he's gone, run, go. Yeah, John and Peter are racing. They get to the tomb. They see that it's true. So they're like, what do? They run out some other place, and then she comes back. She's trying to figure out what's going on. She's already been there once, but she's just trying to understand everything. And that's when she sees the angels sitting there. So the angels waited to appear till Mary comes on the spot, Mary Magdalene. This is the woman who was demon-possessed, and Jesus cast the demons out of her, and she became one of his primary followers, following around, helping support his ministry. And so here she is, and John focuses the spotlight on her, and the question that is asked by the angels is, why are you weeping? It's funny, because that's the exact same question Jesus asked. She doesn't know who he is. He says, woman, why are you weeping? Now, I think John is very intentional in why he chose to focus in on this question. I'm sure other conversations happen, but this is what John wants us to hear. Possibly because it's perhaps the most basic question of our human experience. If you ask me, Stephen, why are you weeping? I will say to you, how much time do you have? Right? To get to the bottom of our tears is to get to the bottom of our hearts, our desires, our hopes, our expectations, our disappointments, our confusion. That tear is a symbol in and of itself, isn't it? It represents, it's a sorrow in liquid form. That's what tears are. From the experience of chaos in which we find ourselves. We basically cry these tears of sorrow for 3 reasons that I can discern. We cry because of loss, we cry because of pain, or we cry because of fear. Now, I know some of you are like, well, I cry tears of joy. Well, yes and no. I get that. Somebody's like, you're like, what's happening? Nothing, it's wonderful, everything's great. And I get that, okay? I mean, it might feel weird at the moment, but I get it. But what you don't understand is it's still in the category of fear, pain, or loss. Because the reason we cry tears of joy is because we're so overwhelmed by the release of a loss we thought or anticipated, or a pain that was upon us that's now gone, or a fear we had that's now been released, and all of a sudden the tears come. What is that? It's still the emotional release from loss, pain, or fear. Even though it's in a joyful way, it's the releasing of all that because of something good that's happened. So I will add one more category, loss, pain, fear, and Little House on the Prairie, because it's on this category, it's the show made to make you cry every time. And that's a whole separate sermon for another day, why people do this to us. But what I want you to understand is that these things are very real. Fear. Think about a child who is separated from a parent. What happens? Tears, fear, pain. When things hurt me or others, the natural response is tears. It's not always physical only. Sometimes it's emotional pain born of shame or confusion or frustration, but an internal pain that we experience on our behalf or others, and tears come. Loss. When we lose something or especially someone meaningful to us, someone we love, perhaps that's when our tears come the most powerfully. Am I right? Now, the reason we typically ask the question, why are you crying, is to orient us, right? It's to locate the fear or the pain or the loss within the person to whom we're asking the question. If I see one of you crying, I will come up to you probably and say, why are you crying? What's going on? And the reason I'm asking is because I don't have all the information. If I knew, I wouldn't ask you. But I need to be oriented to your sorrow, and so I have to ask the question, why are you crying? Why are you weeping? And you have to voluntarily let me in on your pain, sorrow, or fear. But here's my point. This is not what the angels were doing or what Jesus was doing. If you were to tell me, here's why I'm crying, Stephen, perhaps I could help. If it's sorrow, maybe I could just be a presence and say, hey, have a Kleenex. I'm here. I don't understand. I don't know what you're going through, but I'm here. Perhaps if it's physical pain, I could say, can I take you to the doctor? Can I give you some medicine? I just have happen to have some right here. No, I don't carry medicine with me, but if I did, I know where I can get some. If it's fear, I could say, could you explain to me why you're so afraid? Maybe I could give you a different perspective to change that fear into some form of courage or gratitude. And this is a very human thing that we do. Perhaps we can help. Why are you crying? Perhaps I can be of help. But this is not what the angels were doing. John is signaling for us that something has happened in the very order of the world that changes what tears mean. John is doing something very different here. For John, these tears and this question are symbolic. The tears are symbolic of all of us, humans in chaos, in brokenness, in pain, in fear, weeping in confusion. Do you not feel what Mary felt in that moment? Nothing matters. Nothing worked out as I anticipated. Everything's broken. All the you-know-what has hit the fan. It's all done. It's messy. I'm just going to stand here and weep. But John wants us to hear this question twice. One from the lips of angels and one from the lips of Jesus. Why are you weeping? What do you mean, why am I weeping? The world is falling apart. There's chaos and murder and anger and fear. And what do you mean, why am I weeping? Why am I not weeping? Should be the question we ask ourselves every single day. But Jesus asked the same question. Why are you weeping? I think what John is doing is he's wanting to signal to us who are reading this that there's a change that has taken place. There's a change that has happened, that Jesus is bringing in something that changes the very story of tears itself. You see, Jesus is literally, in his resurrection, bringing God's future into our present. In our present, it's a mess, isn't it? It always is. Sometimes it feels like it's more than others, but you just go to different parts of the world and you'll see there's messiness everywhere, ups and downs all the time. It's in our own hearts, it's in our families, it's in our cities, it's in our country, it's in our world. But what's happening here is Jesus is bringing God's good future, the way it was supposed to be, the way that God intended it to be, and in his resurrection, he's pulling that future into our present. So Jesus is literally standing with God's future, looking at this weeping woman, this crying woman, and saying, "Why are you weeping?" I literally am the very personification of bringing in God's good future, and I'm standing right in front of you. Everything that you understand has now changed. The whole world is upside down now because I have literally inaugurated in a new future. And Jesus is standing literally in the overlap of God's good order and this present messy world we're in. And he's literally standing right in the overlap and saying, "Why are you weeping?" Now, for him to say that and mean it must mean that everything has happened that needs to happen to fix all the mess that we constantly weep about. Jesus must have done something on the cross and in the resurrection that literally changes everything about our tears and the meaning of our tears. And it also means that Jesus must be 100% confident that all that is in God's heart and mind will be realized because of his resurrection. He has no doubt, so much so that he can talk to a weeping woman and say, "Why are you weeping?" He knows why she's weeping. He knows why you're weeping. He knows why I'm weeping. He knows every tear, the Bible says, that we cry. Every tear he keeps in a bottle. He knows our tears intimately. And yet he has the audacity to look at you and to look at Mary and to look at me and say, "Why are you weeping?" Now, remember, Mary is not just Mary. She is symbolic here of humanity. Everything sad or bad is no longer a problem in God's future. If Jesus is here in the flesh, then all that is sad and bad is dealt with in God's future. This is a universal reality. It's not just a Middle Eastern thing or a Second Temple Judaism thing or an ancient thing. It's a universal undoing of all that is sad, all that is bad in this world, and Jesus is bringing in universal healing, an ultimate restoration of all things. So Jesus asked the question, "Why are you crying?" So here's the last little piece to this. What Jesus is doing is he's inviting us in and Mary in to a new way of thinking about life. So did you notice, and maybe you were offended by this, I don't know. You should be offended by the scripture, by the way, occasionally, because the writers write it so that you'll kind of like get a little offended. Maybe you don't take it seriously enough to get offended, but you should, and I hope you will someday. I hope this will like hit you in this way. But do you see what happens here when she realizes who this is? And in verse 17, he says to her, what does he say to her? It kind of sounds like he's being a little mean, right? She kind of like grabs him. In the other Gospels, we see that the other ladies were actually historically also there. They're like grabbing his feet and his legs and like, Jesus, which is what you would do, right? If it's like, boom, all of a sudden, the king of the world is there, and everything you thought that was bad is now flipped upside down, what would you do? Would you just stand back and be like, good news, this is great, you know? No, you would be like, ah! And that's what they did, because they're humans. They grabbed his legs and like, oh, Jesus. And what does Jesus say to them? This is like, oh, yeah, thank you, guys. No, what does he say? Don't cling to me. Like, what is this? Did that not offend you a little bit? John is writing this intentionally. This is another signal for you. This is a signal for Mary that something has changed. Jesus says, I haven't yet gone up to the Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I'm going up to my Father and your Father, to God and your God. Jesus is signaling something is different. There's a new way of experiencing Jesus. Mary had experienced Jesus in the flesh all this time, hanging out with him, following him around to the mountainside as he's teaching, seeing him do these miracles. She had had this relationship with Jesus that was very visible and physical in the sense that she could see him and touch him, and he was right there in the flesh. And now Jesus is signaling something different. Now you have to remember, all the symbols all around us, it's in a garden, which is a symbol of beauty and joy and order, and the perfumes, the smells that have been used to anoint his body are all in the air. And here's Jesus in this intimate conversation with just Mary. We know from the other writers there were other people there, other ladies. But here, John focuses on just Mary and Jesus because he wants us to see the intimacy of this conversation as Jesus draws her in and explains to her the new situation. So that means John wants you to draw in that same way. It's going to be different now. I want you to go tell the disciples that there's a new way of things happening. I've brought in God's good future, but I'm going to leave and I'm going to give a good gift to all of you that's going to blow your mind. And it's in this way, this new day can actually be realized right now in you individually as a corporate group who are following Jesus together. And so this is what Mary does. She goes and she tells the disciples everything that she has seen and heard. So John is setting up for us this very basic question. He starts with, why are you weeping? And that taps into every part of our broken humanity. But what John is doing is he's leading us to this ultimate question. This is what he's been doing the whole book. He's been leading each step of the way, each glory sign, the cross, now the resurrection. He's leading us and drawing us into this ultimate question. He wants to ask us the question, do you see the glory and the beauty of Jesus? Do you see it? This is what he's been doing. This is why he's showing you all these symbols and signs throughout the whole book. And this is why he paints this beautiful, intimate picture between Jesus and Mary as Jesus draws Mary in and says, don't cling to me. Go tell the disciples, by the way, which was a huge honor. She's literally she had the first apostolic commission from Jesus. Go tell the disciples that I'm not here, that I'm risen just as I said. John wants us to see the glory of Jesus, and his key word he always uses is believe. He means by that to press in, to throw all that we are in with this reality that Jesus really has brought in a new way of doing things, a new order of things, that he really has done all that is necessary to set this world right again. This is why in the book of Philippians, the Apostle Paul, you know what he says? He says, I count everything in the world as dung. You know what dung is? Yeah. And he actually, in his language, he would have used a more offensive word, just so you know. But I'm going to be nice to you. He's using words that are supposed to be shocking. He says, everything I see, the whole world, I count it as dung, and here's why. He said, that I might know him, speaking of Jesus, and his next line is, and the power of his resurrection. Paul is not saying that you disconnect from the reality that we live in. You can't. But he's saying, in the midst of this reality we're living in that's very difficult and full of tears and challenges, he's saying, I want to know the power and the glory of the resurrected Christ. He said, that's what I want to know so bad. I count everything else as so small, so insignificant, so meaningless compared to knowing the power and the glory of Jesus and his resurrection. And this is what John has been doing all along. He doesn't want us just to mentally say, oh yeah, check, I believe that Jesus rose from the grave. I believe that's a historical reality. And notice, we didn't talk a lot about history today. Last year I did, and I will again at some other point. That's when you're in Matthew, and when you're in Mark, and when you're in Luke. But when you're in John, you are drawn into the intimacy of a Savior who is changing the whole world and calling us in to believe, to put our whole selves in this reality, to know Jesus and his resurrection, that I might know him and the power of his resurrection. Now, I know that we all still live in brokenness in the present. But I just want to say to you today, just for one day, no tears. Not because you don't want to cry, because I almost do right now. There's so much messed up, right? but as a symbol, as a stance of courage that Jesus is who he says he is, that he has come and has fixed everything, and one day that overlap that has taken place will be completely immersed in the garden that is the goodness of God's original intention for all things. For one day, at least a year, we wipe our tears away and we say, no tears. Because when Jesus asks us, why are you weeping? We say, we're not, because we're in on the story. We know what you're doing. Oh, we're going to be crying tomorrow. I'll be. If House on the Prairie is playing, I'll definitely be crying. But for one day, symbolically, as a sign and a symbol to all who are here, we say today, no tears. Because Jesus Christ has conquered. He is the victor. He has crushed death. He has taken our sin, and he has won the day. And we celebrate in this special symbolic way, one day with no tears. Would you join me today? And as a sign to the world, as a sign to each other, as a symbol of our trust and belief in Jesus, saying, Jesus, today, no tears. You have risen, you have conquered, and you are bringing in a new order of things that will blow our minds. Would you bow your heads and close your eyes with me?